Welcome to the True Story London podcast. I'm Michelle Toth. In this podcast, we listen to a true personal story told live at one of our shows in London, followed by a conversation with the storyteller about their background, process, story themes, and more. Today's storyteller is Christopher Wade, sharing a truly shocking story of betrayal, deceit, and radical forgiveness. In our discussion afterward, we talk about the influence of his working-class upbringing, the meaning and action Christopher has taken in the aftermath of this story's events, and his wise outlook on healing. But first, let's listen to his story recorded live in London.
I fell absolutely head over heels in love with a guy, and this wasn't normal love. He was a doctor, and where I'm from, working class, white trash. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of where I'm from, but those are the facts, people. Marrying a doctor was pretty big shit for me back in the East End. We weren't getting married. I didn't ask him, but I was always wearing the dress. That's a true story. And it went quick. Gays are really quick. We're the same as the lesbians. Within a couple of months, you are actually married, cats, home, that kind of thing. And he'd been to see my friends. We'd been on holidays together. And because I'm a gentleman of a certain age, you have the chat. Living through the 80s and 90s as a young gay boy, seeing those awful adverts on the telly where the tombstone would fall down. AIDS was it was horrific. It was a horrific time, and it's still a pandemic that rages on today. And so it was really important to have that conversation, and we did. And he had tested earlier in the year, as did I, and we were both negative. So that's the chat that you have. And then sometimes you'd go for a test together, and I was that bitch. And I couldn't pin him down for a test. He was a junior doctor on rotation at the time, so I understood that he was busy, and he was busy. But I went for a test anyway, and I tested negative. And about 10 days later, I came over really, really unwell. Hit me like a train. We're watching X Factor. I have a generational issue that some people might not understand, AIDS and X Factor. And he turned to me, because I had every symptom. I was sweating, my throat was sore, I had a massive rash across my chest. I had every symptom of what is called seroconversion, when your body starts to fight virus. And he said to me, "You're showing signs of seroconversion." Now, I knew what that meant. I'd seen the adverts, I had friends that passed away from HIV-related illness. I knew those words. But for him to say that to me just felt wrong. So I said, what are you trying to say? Like, seroconversion, it could just be the fucking flu. I just had a fever and a sore throat with a rash on my chest. He said, "You must go and get tested." And it just didn't feel right. But I went for a test the following day, and I tested positive for HIV. And my world just got smaller. I left the clinic, and I called him straight away, and he dumped me. I know, fucking bastard. And my world got smaller again. But within a couple of weeks, he was back, and there's no rationale in these moments. I didn't care what was going through his head. I just needed him because I was ill. I was still seroconverting like a motherfucker. I wasn't in a very good mental state, and I needed him. And he was a fucking doctor. Like, who else would be able to look after me, I thought. A few months after that, I'd been going at him, like, "You must get tested. You must get tested." Not just because I wanted to ensure that he was safe. I wanted him not just to survive, but to thrive. And to do that, you need to be on medication. You can live a normal life on medication, and if you're healthy and your viral load is undetectable, you can't pass the disease on. And so he came back one day in the afternoon, really glum face, and he had a plaster on his arm, and he said to me, I'm in the club. In my head, I thought, you fucking bastard. Like, I didn't want this club membership. I need a refund now. I rescind immediately. Take it fucking back. I didn't do any of that. Obviously, I didn't say nothing at all. I just grabbed him and I held him close and I said, look, we're gonna get through this together. And he sort of spoke really softly in my ear and he said, well, we are intrinsically linked. And it felt bad. But in that moment of manipulation, which I realise now looking back retrospectively, I just needed him. So shortly after that, we met for lunch. He was living in my home at this point. And he sent me a text saying, oh, babe, before you leave the house, would you mind just checking if my stethoscope is at home? I think I might have left it in my docs box. If it's there, can you bring it? So I go to the docs box, and in this box was a stethoscope and 2 letters that were dated nearly 2 years before we met, confirming that he was HIV positive. And my world just got smaller again. So your plaster on the arm and that performance in the kitchen about being in the club, coming for me with that shit, it was all a lie. And then everything else starts to sort of unravel, you know. But I stayed, and looking back, I realised why I was alone, although I had the most incredible people around me, but I was alone in that virus. And he was the only connection that I had to life and some kind of stability in the most darkest times. And then the straw that broke the camel's back was when he gave me an ultimatum. I don't do dares, I don't do ultimatums. You're just going to lose, don't fucking bother. Or prepared to be shown up, tits out, running down the road, all that shit, I don't care. And my friend was just travelling back from South Africa, had been away for 3 years. And my partner at the time hadn't met him. But he'd done a really good job of ostracising me from all of my other friends. And this was my chance, you know. My closest friend from a kid, I was 17 when we met. And he said to me, we're in a pub, sitting down, he says to me, you can't see Darren, it's him or me. And I stood up in the pub, probably dramatically, if I'm honest. And I said, you're never going to see me again. And then I sashayed away. I did. I left the pub. Took my pint, obviously. And I didn't see him until I had my day in court. It took everything to do that. It was huge. I don't take not one day for granted. It was a really dark time. It took 4 years to get to court. If anyone's been through the judicial system, it doesn't really work for victims. Doesn't work at all, actually. I had this story in front of him with a jury of our peers, and my world started to heal. It was the start of my healing process. I know that now. Getting to court, I mean, I was talking to the Crown Prosecution Service sometimes twice a week for most of that time until we got there. It was a horrific, dark experience. But in the darkest times, there is light. And I had always the most incredible friends that were more like family, and I had the most amazing family that were more like friends to me. That and a fucking amazing therapist. Jesus Christ, she changed my life. My most proudest achievement is the foundation that I set up 5 years ago. So I set up the Mulwade Foundation, which is a foundation that looks after people with HIV. And 5 years is a long time in the charity world. We've done a huge amount of work. It is my proudest achievement, making sure that that energy that you might have felt at the beginning was pretty prickly, was put into something that could make a difference, to create safe spaces for those that need it, to create family for those that don't have it, and to give back something that, was, for me, really, really important at the time, when my world was so small. And part of the end of this journey, really, is being here and sharing my story with you today. So thank you so much.
Christopher, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
How does it sound hearing your story back?
Well, I was initially really nervous, in part because I do sound like Alan Carr on acid. And two, because I know, where it touches me. I know that it would just come back to the surface again, which is fine, but it still hurts.
Of course, yeah. It's been such a journey. And I think about this story, and it has so much drama and so many themes running through it. And I wonder, just for you, what is this story most about?
I think what we have to take from this story, and I say we in the collective, is forgiveness and healing. You ain't getting anywhere without those two. You just aren't. It's really, 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 really important that at some point you find it somewhere within yourself to forgive.
I feel like that theme of forgiveness is one of the most important for us to spend time on. So I'd love to get there.
I think it's important to remember before we get there that not everyone is at that point. And so to hear this, huge embrace of forgiveness can, for some people listening, be actually pretty difficult.
Because they're hard to imagine.
Absolutely. And I felt that way in 2015 when I Sarah converted and didn't know which end was up and if the world was going to collapse.
When it was getting smaller and smaller.
And smaller and smaller.
I'm curious about the beginning because you referenced being from a working class background. Whenever I hear someone describe their upbringing as working class, I just feel bonded because I'm also from a working class background. And I always want to know the story.
Trauma bond, babe.
And then
it's a trauma bond.
It could be a trauma bond. Although I have to say, the older I get, the more I feel like being working class is in and of itself a beautiful thing. It doesn't have to be a starting place where there's a different destination.
It takes some work to really appreciate those roots, though. For my story, there was a point in time where I couldn't be myself. And that's not about being gay. I mean, you can't hide this away. You can't dress this down. But in my industry, I had to pretend, had to learn to speak differently and act in a way that fitted the people that I was working with.
So you grew up in the East End of London.
I did, yeah. Real poverty, as in not always having food, that type of poverty. Having to knock at the neighbours. And if I knocked at the neighbours, they knew that I was hungry. And then the neighbours knocking at ours at times.
Really?
Because we knew they were hungry. I was lucky to have a really close-knit at the time, immediate family, so aunts and uncles and cousins. And so for the majority, I would usually be with them. And that meant that I had food.
Wow.
I was a kid bringing up kids. I was looking after my sister, who is only 4 years younger than me, but without getting her up for school, giving her breakfast, getting her dressed, taking her to school, bringing her home, she wouldn't have had an education. My mum was severely depressed. So she had manic depression back then. I think we're calling it bipolar disorder now. And the result was a mum that stayed in bed usually until we went to bed. But not a sob story. It's made me resourceful, resilient, empathetic, compassionate, kind. I know I've got all those things. And I can be a bitch. Because if that little cow didn't get out of bed for school, I was having to drag her out of bed. That hunger, it sort of transcends the tummy. And the result was I was never going to fail. It was impossible. I knew exactly where I was going from a really young age. Not necessarily in property and, working for a charity, but I knew I was going to succeed. My success, what I feel is success. And I ain't done it, by the way, like I'm barely out my teens.
You're in the middle.
Shush.
Not even.
Thank you. I wanted to do great things for myself, but definitely great things for others.
I think that's such an interesting reality where some people confronted with the same upbringing as you would cower and go to bed like your poor mom, right?
Yeah,
and other people like you find drive and purpose. Like, I will not have this forever. I will change this for myself, for my sister. Do you think that's more who you are, wiring, or was there something about the environment that made you more likely to experience motivation from your circumstances?
I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I think first and foremost, a big part of it will be mental illness, for sure. You know, as a person, my mother suffering with, at the time, diagnosed manic depression, psychosis, that she was medicated for. Already you're fighting a losing battle when it comes to being able to get yourself mentally, how I have to G myself up to fight the day. And my father's also, unfortunately, paranoid schizophrenic. He's been sectioned for most of my life. The kindest guy you'll ever meet in your life. Fantastic musician. Just really, really, really unwell. So we moved about quite a bit. Normally the rent man. Or the lecky man, just depended who wanted money.
Is lecky electric?
Electricity, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We initially lived in a really big council block, and it was in a big horseshoe shape. And when the lecky man would get to like flat number 1, who would obviously not answer the door because no one had any money to pay the electricity, you'd hear out the back, "Lecky man!" And then you'd hear, and all the doors would be shut and the windows would be shut and everyone would be pretending not to be in.
I love the sense of camaraderie.
Community.
Yes.
No, there really was. It really was. It really was community. We're all protecting each other. Criminality, I think, is probably what it would be considered now. And
I don't know. It's hard to think criminality when people are just trying to get by.
yeah, and they can't afford the lecky.
Yep.
What do? You don't answer the door. Again, though, none of this is anything to be sad about for me now, because I draw on all of these experiences all the time. There are times when obviously it is a subconscious effort, but there are times when it's very conscious. Like, I'll know how to deal with a situation because I had to deal with a lecky man. Mm-hmm. You know? Yeah. I know how to listen to somebody that is in that situation because I was there. So I get it.
So you moved around a bit.
We did. I think I went to more than 7, maybe 9 primary schools, 3 secondary schools, and that was in part because of my sexuality. So I was bullied for being gay, and that happened right up until I was in like year 9. Mm-hmm. So by the time I was in the 3rd year, I was just a bad bitch. Like, I decided that I knew that by that point, with all of the trauma that I'd been through personally in my life, with abusive stepfathers, not being able to eat food if it wasn't available, just a cycle and pattern of abuse that was obviously passed down. I just decided one day, fuck it. You're not going to hit me anymore. You're not going to hurt me anymore. I am who I am and I can't change it, because if I could change it, I wouldn't have been gay back then. Of course not. I would have been normal in, inverted commas, like everybody else. Why would I want to be different and act differently and speak differently? Why would I want that? Why wouldn't I want to just fit in with everybody
Just in the sense that it's so unsafe.
Yeah.
So we have a little bit of sense of your life that brought you to the place of having a career and living in London.
Yeah.
At the time when you met the partner in this story.
Yes.
And you described a little bit of blind excitement about the fact that he was a doctor. I mean, it probably never occurred to you that such a thing was possible, that he could withhold information like this from you. But it's so much more than that. I mean, it's just, this is like a degree of obfuscation and lying and lack of ethics that is truly stunning.
It's absolutely bonkers. And as a peasant, you really put a huge amount of weight into these hierarchical figures of doctors and barristers and lawyers. And I believed my doctors. I'd been to the doctors plenty. I had my tonsils out as a kid. I had cysts up under my arm. And they really looked after me. They were good people. They were kind. And
respected.
1,000,000%. I mean, across communities, but especially in mine. And I believed him with everything that I had. When you look back, the signs were there. They were.
Willful blindness, like you just wanted it to
Why
work out.
Why would you not believe a doctor anyway?
Of course.
And I loved him.
And there were really good things about this relationship too, right? Like fun and...
Yeah, he got me, and it's weird because he was playing polo and at private school
and had this amazing childhood, amazing upbringing, amazing parents that adored him and idolized this man. But somehow he still got me. Maybe because he met patients that were like me every single day of his working life, possibly. He understood, and as a result, I think we had a really good understanding of each other. I'd met plenty of people that had that silver spoon. That's fine. I can deal with that. We can still be friends. I'll shock you with some of the stuff that's happened to me, but God, I've heard some stories from the poshies.
Well, what system produced this guy that would lie to you in this manner and betray you in this manner?
I think it's really important. I think it's a really important question. And the reason why I think it's important is because without understanding, it's really difficult to find the forgiveness that you need to heal. He's British Indian. His parents came over from Kenya, I think, in the 60s. So emigrated to Kenya from India. Huge Indian population in Kenya. Came to the United Kingdom and raised their children. My partner and his sibling were born in the United Kingdom. And they started with a corner shop. They're like the real, the real success
story,
Indian story, which should be celebrated. And they invested in their kids. He had the best education, he had the best life, and they all worked in the shop. He would never admit to that, but they all had to work in the shop.
That's interesting. You say he wouldn't tell you.
No, but I think that's how he progressed. He was so ashamed, not just of his sexuality, because he couldn't tell his parents. Later on, obviously, his HIV status that he told nobody about, not even his employer. But he was ashamed of being Indian. And I found that from the East End, where I never took French. I took Sylheti because half of my friends at school were from Bangladesh. Well, I never had any French friends. Why would I want to bloody talk French? Do you know what I mean? And I have a GCSE in Bangladesh, in Sylheti. And so, this was part of my culture. I didn't really understand, but where he was from, in Birmingham, there were real divides. And I think that had a real effect on him.
Wow.
He never called himself his real name. He made up a name that sounded Portuguese. So if you looked at him, he could potentially be Portuguese.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Christopher, there's so many angles, so many elements, so many sub-stories here. They're just so fundamentally interesting, like how you took such a difficult childhood and used it for motivation, but it still came with you, right? Because you're in this relationship and you're not doubting some of the signals that it sounds like you were getting. And when you look back, you can see that they were there. But for whatever reason, you either didn't notice them or you didn't act on them. And so now you find out that you're HIV positive and his immediate reaction is to dump you.
Yeah.
Was this strictly performative or what was going on there?
First of all, making sense of it then I think is really important because I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the learning and development that I have now. So then it was just pain. It was pain. I've got AIDS. Didn't have AIDS, HIV positive, but I'm still in my 80s
You're
head.
in the 80s,
I'm in my 80s head, I can
Yeah.
still see those tombstones falling down. I'm dirty. Nobody wants me. Of course he's going to dump me. I think it's important to understand my mindset at the time, which was not really knowing where I was, what I was doing. Just probably some comfort in the abuse, actually.
Yeah, the familiarity of the way you were being treated was somehow...
Felt a little bit like home.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
Yeah, and so I did what I do best. I took the wheel.
Yeah.
I knew where he was at the time, in the pub. I ran to the pub. I was barefoot, no joke. I don't know why I was barefoot, but it sounds great for the story.
It's great for the movie. It's good tips
Zoe
for the
Bud
for the
and myself
cinematographer.
ran to the pub. I got to the pub and they were just casually talking, and when he saw me, he started to cry. And I said, "You have to come home right now. I'm not doing this on my own." Basically just had a little bit of a breakdown. I was like, "You can't leave me."
Wow.
And he wouldn't come back. So like a fool, I just had to turn around and walk home with no shoes on.
Oh.
Why wasn't I wearing any shoes? That's what we need to know.
Do you think he was fully aware of what he was doing and how he was manipulating the situation? Do you think he was lying to himself in any way?
He's from this really religious family whereby he can't even express his sexuality. Try and tell your family you're HIV positive. He is a doctor, still practicing currently, and that brings a whole load of baggage on its own. And actually, one of the letters that I mention in the story was from his occupational health department that said, "Thanks for telling us. Let us know if you need anything. Please remember, you must not." And then it had a whole list of things that when you are unmedicated, i.e. you're still contagious, that you cannot do. Blood transfusions and using needles, etc., etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I just know that that was in his head. He wasn't able to be a doctor, really. You know, this is something that he was so passionate about. He didn't just do a PhD. He had 3 degrees and a master's. Like, this guy wanted nothing else than to be a medical professional. And I think that had an impact. The difficulty bringing all of that together and not really wanting to own up to that in your own mind so that you can start to deal. Never.
The creepiness of his words, like,
we're intrinsically linked.
I'm in the club now. Oh my gosh, it makes you want to vomit. Yes.
Turns my stomach.
Do you think you kind of knew something was off there, or is it only upon reflection?
I did believe him.
Wow.
Yeah, I did. I knew he'd cheated.
Really?
Because there was a couple of occasions where I found photos on his phone. There were photos of him, bearing in mind it was only a couple of weeks before that I'd been diagnosed HIV, where he was receiving penetrative sex without a condom. And he came back in and I just passed the phone to him and was like, we're not having a conversation about who gave who what. I have not seen anyone else apart from you. The weekend that you find out that I'm not well, look at this. And he started to cry.
Mm.
And that's when he said to me, and this I do believe, he said to me, "Christopher, I have a really, really difficult relationship with sex." No shit.
This is so extreme. It's not that I can't understand how it could happen. It's just hard to get past how big of a deal it is and what the impact is.
It's a huge deal. My life was changed irreversibly.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think that I've taken those lessons. I've learned a lot through this process. I've taken that energy and put it into really positive
I know,
use.
absolutely. And I don't want my own shock and empathy and sympathy for you to have us dwell for too long on this extreme negative.
It's important for people to hear it, though, because there'll be people in that situation, won't there? There'll be people that are in a situation of grief or trauma that will listen and go, "Oh, I'm not on my own."
I agree with you so much. And I'm so grateful for you telling us and sharing us and opening up to your lived experience. It's really a generous thing for you to do. So let's talk about how you got out of it. Tell us about the ultimatum and how that helped you to have the light bulb turn on.
In the second year that we were together, he gave me syphilis. I felt when I contracted syphilis the same as I did when I seroconverted, as if I seroconverted all over again, and the trauma of that was horrific. Shortly after that, he then gave me gonorrhea, and I just sat him down and was like, what do we need to do? What will it take for me to be enough? And is that even a possibility? Let's have an honest conversation about it. And we decided in the mid part of the second year to have an open relationship. I don't really like sharing my food. I'm going to just put that out there. But I loved him so much. And more than that, I was in a situation whereby I was almost feeding off of the trauma. I knew at that point nothing else. And it wasn't just HIV. It was the cheating. It was the abuse. It was the leaving me in clubs and going home with people. Like, he was really, I saw everything and more with that guy. My close-knit friends, they weren't really in a position to stage any real intervention. because I was so intrinsically linked, in his words, to this man. But what they did help me. So they didn't ostracize me, but they would never invite him. And I started to really need them. And I think they knew that. And I think the more they invited me and not him, and then it sort of spiraled into me just spending more time with my friends.
Did it help you to get your world to be bigger?
It helped for it to feel more robust again. And little by little throughout that second year, I'd see them more. We'd do more together. I think they started to listen about what was going on, and I was only telling them because I really needed to get away, and I knew that my time was coming.
Your time to get away was coming.
Yeah, my time to leave. And that for me was huge because that wasn't my language. That's not what I saw. I saw my mum in abusive relationship after abusive relationship. And so that was my normality. That was my norm. It would have been the end of the second year when Darren was coming home. And he had never met Darren before, but he'd heard about Darren because Darren and I have been friends since I was 17. But he'd never met Darren. But what he knew of Darren was, this was my bitch. He had my back. And he didn't have any of this history. He was just going to come in to meet my ex-partner, just as he is. And I think the fear for my ex-partner was, he's going to see me. He will see me. And we were in a pub, and he told me straight up, you can't see Darren. Without even blinking, you cannot see Darren. And I said to him in the pub, I said, well, don't give me an ultimatum because you won't win. And I think I said I took my part with it, but I think I drank it. I think I downed it and won.
Even better for the film, for the cinematic version of this.
I drank 2 pints in one go. And then I stood up and I said, you will never see me again. And the next time he saw me was in the dock.
Wow. And you made this huge decision to pursue him through the courts. Can you attempt to summarize what happened?
So on the first day of court, I was examined by the Crown, and he was in the dock whilst I was telling my story, him having to listen to me whilst a juror of our peers was also listening, and that was really powerful. For reasons that I don't know, we were only given 2 weeks. Juries need a minimum of 7 days to deliberate, even if they deliberate in 7 minutes. So we only had a week. We had enough evidence, witnesses, medical professionals. It should have been probably a month. The result was, by the end of the first week, I still hadn't been cross-examined, and without being cross-examined, the court case doesn't really go on. Towards the end of that week, my barrister came in and said, I'm really sorry, we don't have any more time. You still haven't been cross-examined. We have a shed load more evidence to go through. But the judge is in Cyprus in 2 weeks because he's sitting on a tax case. He's a tax judge. Never sat on a GBH, a grievous bodily harm case before. Never. And he had reserved it for himself. I got an email about a month later. The detective that had been working on the case with me for a number of years, he was so good. He actually phoned me and gave me a heads up. He said, look, you're going to get an email from the CPS. He said, you must appeal this decision. I was like, well, what's the decision? He said, they're throwing it out. It's been too long. You reported it in 2017. It's 2022. And just generally with anything judicial, the longer you sit with evidence, the longer these things go on, the harder it is to prosecute. Those are the stats. And I was like, I don't really want to appeal. I'm done with this shit. I just started a new job. I just made director at my firm. Just let me be now.
I did my part. It didn't work out.
And you know what? Yeah. I had my day in court. Think of it what you will. But he had to listen to me.
Yep.
Put a mirror right up to his face and say, this is what you did. I spoke to my friends and they were of the opinion that I should. And I did. I appealed the decision. They came back and said the same thing. Well, they almost sent the same letter. Looking back, I'd still right now, today, most probably, be in a Crown prosecution case.
And so that was the best decision for you, was to let it go.
Yeah.
And
$1,000,000%.
You're already now 5 years into your foundation. It sounds like if you had to make a choice about where you were going to put your discretionary effort, you wanted to put it into your foundation and
100%.
not into this court case. So can you update us what's happening with the foundation?
So this is our 5th birthday this year. And to celebrate 5 years of Mulwade, we're holding 5 events. One event that I'm so looking forward to, that I'm so proud of that we managed to book, is The Riot Act that stars Alexis Gregory. That is a show about real people's true stories.
Sounds right up my alley.
Oh, you would love this show.
Oh, right up my street. Sorry.
No, you can say alley. That means something else in my community. And after the Stonewall riots, I think he went to San Fran in 2010 or something. There weren't many people left from that time, but he interviewed them and told them what he was going to do. He was going to make a show about queer life in that time and the fight and the struggle and how we got to where we are so that we never forget. He also spoke to some fabulous people that were drag queens in the 80s and 90s, but also some people that had lived through all of that period with HIV. And he wrote verbatim what they'd said to him in these interviews, and then brought these characters, some of them are dead now, which is so sad, but brought these characters back to life through this show. And that's our World AIDS Day event on the 1st of December.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Well, we'll put all that information in the show notes so we can all meet you there. So, Christopher, it's just been astonishing to get to spend this time with you, to hear your story, to hear the backstory, and to really just understand so much better everything you went through and everything you stand for. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much. And from my perspective, if I may, without True Story, I genuinely wouldn't have really been able to finalise my story. And I've said it before, I think that True Story should be written into the national curriculum.
Thanks for listening. For more information about today's storyteller and conversation, check out the show notes. The True Story London podcast is hosted by me, Michelle Toth. Our producer is Ellis Ballard. Our theme music is by Sea Noise. Live recordings were provided by Laughing Around and recorded at 21 Soho. More information about our live shows and workshops can be found at truestorylondon.com. And just one more thing. If you haven't already, please subscribe or follow and rate us on your favorite podcast platform. It really does help us to reach more people. Thanks, and we'll see you for another episode soon.